Okay, great. So I'm Marc, Paulina. Thanks. So I work at Google. I actually used to work with Kostya from User Study. So we worked on the first conversational voice actions in the Google search app. So you used to be able to tap the microphone in the search box. You could ask questions and you get answers. And you could also ask things about actions as well. You could ask Google to remind you about things, to play music, to send messages. And people didn't really know that they could tap on that mic in the search box, but this was the kind of precursor to the kinds of voice experiences that you can currently do with the Google Assistant. So since then, for the last just under 4 years, I've been working from that experience and then for the Google Assistant on Pixel and Android mobile. And now I'm currently the UX lead for conversational experience on Android Wear, so the smartwatches, so you can be like a super spy and speak to your watch. But here, what I basically want to talk about is the design process, the user-centered design process. So right now, it's an interesting time. There's a lot of emerging technologies. There's AI, there's Internet of Things, there's natural language understanding, there's robotics. And none of these technologies have the ability to understand how we feel. And that's a big problem. When we meet someone for the first time, we don't think about, how do they function? Or what are they capable of? We think about these people in terms of, how do they make me feel? Are they funny? Are they happy? Are they sad? It's the feeling that gives us the impression of who we're speaking to. So as I said, it's an interesting time. All of these technologies are kind of converging into these natural user interfaces. This is one example. This is the voice experience. But there's also AR and VR and gesture and lots of natural interfaces. So it's amazing, all of these really complex technologies coming together. But this is a really user-centered interface. When someone sees this, when they're using it, they have really high expectations. So firstly, it's listening to them. So they expect that they can talk to it. And people are not about to change how they speak. We've all been speaking for a long time. We've learned how to speak. It took us years and years. We're not going to change that. So we expect that this interface is going to understand how we naturally express ourselves. And then because it can understand us, we expect, and also it speaks to us, it speaks back to us, it asks us questions. So we expect that it's intelligent as well. That it's learning about our interests, our likes, our dislikes, that it can make recommendations. So we have super high expectations. So how I've come to understand the expectations that users have is through this theory, which is the media equation. And so this is a book, you can read about it. Basically, Clifford Nass and Byron Reeves did a series of research studies, and every single study they did ultimately resulted in this theory, which is that people interact with media and technology, and we have these social and natural tendencies. So we treat the media as if it's like part of our natural environment. For example, the touchscreen. That's why it's so successful. It's so easy to use because it follows the rules of our natural environment. And another tendency we have, anything that's sort of vaguely social, we think that it's a social interaction, that we start to imagine a persona behind that. Some examples of this in action. This is kind of a funny one, the first video, but you get a sense. No, this is not the one. That was too soon. Okay, so the first video is not working. That's okay, we'll move on, we'll move to the second one.
And you can now switch the iPad off. Thank you.
Okay. I will switch
It
you off.
can't be true. Switch me off.
Yes.
You are not really going to switch me off.
Yes, I will.
Are you?
You made a stupid choice. Yes.
You can decide to keep me switched on. I will be completely silent. Would
Okay.
that be an idea?
Yeah. No, I will switch you off. I will switch you off.
Please.
No, please. This will happen now. One.
Then I will be silent now. Is that alright?
Yes.
Please, you can still change your mind.
No, 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 no. There you go.
It always gets me. It doesn't matter how many times I watch that. It just gets me in the feels. This was a study by Bartnek. And he's done quite a lot of studies, some really interesting stuff. They wanted to know whether people perceive these kind of like robotic interactions to be alive and intelligent. And so they did a series of studies, and the robot would behave in different ways. And depending on how agreeable the robot was, people perceived it to be more alive, more intelligent. And the way that they measured that was that people took longer to switch it off. So if they didn't feel it to be alive, then they would just switch it off. But if they had that feeling of it being alive and intelligent and agreeable, they would take longer and longer to switch it off. And they would have this negative emotional reaction. You know, it would feel bad to switch it off. And you could really perceive that. But it doesn't have to look like that. It doesn't have to have eyes and a smile and sort of nod its head and things. It doesn't have to be. It's anything vaguely social. Oh, so we have got the second video. I don't know if it's going to work.
Many of you feel bad for this lamp. That is because you're crazy. It has no feelings, and the new one is much better.
I don't know what point I'm trying to make by showing that. I have no idea. It's just hilarious. I don't know. Anyway, like, how do we create those emotional experiences? So I'm not trying to invent a new term here. This is not like we used to do user experience and now we're doing human experience. Like, that's crap. But what we do want to do is just pay attention to some new heuristics. When we're talking about these social interactions, it can be a voice interface, it can be an AR, it can be a VR, any natural user interface, there's new heuristics, there's new quality metrics. We used to focus on reliability, accuracy, speed, and those kinds of quality metrics. But now, we're seeing these new heuristics like trust, the relationship, how comfortable the interaction is. So these are new quality metrics that we can kind of grade our experiences. So when talking about empathy, how do we understand empathy? Some people get it mixed up with sympathy. And these are both of these things are vital to have a sense of humanity. People who don't have sympathy or empathy, we usually call them things like a sociopath or even a psychopath. So this is really important for a social interaction, to have that feeling of a human-like quality. So some people get mixed up, sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is basically where you can relate to someone, but you haven't actually been there yourself. So, if someone's having trouble losing weight, you'd be like, yeah, losing weight's hard. But if you're empathic, it means that you've actually been there yourself. You've experienced the pains, the emotional roller coaster, and that you actually empathize with them. Just like, yeah, I've been there, especially after Christmas, like always get it wrong. That is gold dust. That is where you create a really, really deep emotional connection. And so sympathy is great, but empathy is even better. So looking at some of the current experiences with voice interfaces, with social interfaces, these are the kinds of things we're hearing. Like people are getting angry at Google Home when it wakes up, when there's an ad. I think Burger King, thank you very much. And then people are yelling at Alexa. She refused to turn my lamp on. She refused. It's so bad. How dare you? This one caught my attention though. There's a lot of buzz on Twitter about this. This is the Apple Fit Coach. It's not even a voice interface. It's not even talking to you. You never hear the voice of the Apple Fit Coach. But it does prompt you. It has a tone of voice. And it's a social interaction over time. And people are getting really angry because it's so not empathic. The coach is saying, you didn't make a lot of your progress on your rings yesterday. But the user's like, well, you don't know that I've just had 3 surgeries and 6 weeks of antibiotics. It's like so rude. So like what's missing from this experience that's really aggravating people and ultimately damaging trust, damaging that relationship, damaging usage, engagement, retention? I like this quote. I think this quote is so important for a conversation designer, for someone who's designing these social experiences. When people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen. For a voice user interface designer, this is so important. Painters talk about learning how to see when they want to paint something, because you need to learn how to look at the world first before you can communicate that to others. And to design social experiences like this, you need to learn how to listen. It's the art of listening. And you listen throughout the whole of the design process. And that's about being user-centered, that you're listening to the users, what they need, their emotional goals, their motivations. But also just during the design process, when you're coaching a voice talent, the voice that's coming out on the other side, when you're coaching this voice talent, you're listening to them, their prosody, their timbre, the intonation, what they're saying, everything has to be perfect. And I'm not great at that, but my colleagues are experts in this, and just hearing them in the recording studio, it's just incredible. They're listening for absolutely everything. They can even tell if you've got a little croak in your voice. They'll point it out, and then you do it again. So this is really important just for user-centered design. So how do we actually apply that in the design process? I really like the job to be done theory. I use this in my project work. So the job to be done theory, to try and quickly summarize it, if you haven't researched this, I definitely recommend it. There's lots of material. It was created by Intercom, their product design team, and then it was used by MIT originally. Usually when talking about the job to be done, you'll hear designers talking about like, why would they hire this product to do this job? Why would I hire that product? So really what you do with the job to be done is first you find the pain point. And then you figure out, right, what's the tool to solve this job for users? So basically it looks like this. This is an ultimately simplified version. Basically, you've got the when, so you've got the situation, the environment, who's the user, who are they with, as much information about the context as possible. And then you've got I want to, so what do they want to do? What's their expectations? And then you've got so I can, which is the motivations and the anxiety. And that's the emotional part. That's capturing their emotional goals and their fears and their anxieties. And that is how you're going to create this empathic experience, because we already kind of have like the use case. We do that currently in user-centered design, but we don't always have the motivations and the anxieties. That's the extra part. So for the fitness coach, maybe I've made this up. I don't actually work on this product, but if I did, I might be looking at jobs to be done. Like, when my activity rapidly drops, like when we detect that as a signal, I want my fitness coach to ask me why. Why did I stop exercising? So I don't keep receiving workout prompts, and I can focus on my recovery if there's a problem. When I've just had surgery, I want to be able to tell my fitness coach, I want to be able to like get in touch with the fitness coach and say that I can't exercise right now, so I can focus on recovering. And when I tell the fitness coach that I'm going to be out of action, I want to be able to set a date for recovery so we can make a plan for rehabilitation. Like, I want my fitness coach to come along in the journey with me and to be present, because basically, you know, what I haven't said so far is that the new technologies, they don't have an off switch anymore. There's no off switch. It's always on. It's always ready. It's present. It comes through the whole emotional journey. The other tool we use is co-design, so, you know, building on the design sprint. So we do a lot of role-playing now. We do a lot of improv. We've all suddenly become improv experts. So this is one of the design leads at Google, and this is one of the product managers. And we're just, so basically the design lead here is Jared. He's the user, and he's running through a quick cooking exercise. And then Maggie, the product manager, is the assistant. And she can't see what the user's doing. She can only hear what he's saying. But she's got the power of like Google and the phone at hand, so she can see that. And she's coaching him through the exercise, the task at hand. So he's asking things like, you know, measurements, and asking to set timers, and asking about the recipe. It's just an empathy building exercise. And then we also do these design sprints. So we do the job to be done, and then we actually design the persona based on the job to be done. And then we don't get into writing dialogue. We put the post-it notes down, and we just speak to each other, and we just role play. One person puts themselves in the user's shoes, and one person puts themselves into the persona, the agent's shoes. And you have that conversation. And the reason why we do the role play is because it's the best methodology for experiencing the kinds of emotional journey or the social interaction that you're actually going to have in the end experience. So whilst it's not like true, empathic, amazing, you know, research, it's the first step towards getting the people in your organization, the people working on the product, to have a little step towards the experience that the end user is going to have. So we do that actually when ideating on the experience. Oh, this is just an example of someone who is, I don't know, the brand is creating a chocolate bazooka dispensing machine. It was, I don't know what's going on there. Okay, last point. 1 minute, okay, great. Last point, errors matter. So errors in these natural user interfaces, this is where people are kind of like coming up to the edges of their mental model. Like when they get into these error and edge cases, that's where they're finding out how intelligent is this system, how trustworthy, how reliable is this system that I'm interacting with. And so errors are the place where you're going to build the mental model. And it's the place where you can build the best emotional connection. One of the most important factors of building a relationship with someone is to have vulnerability. We all display vulnerability when we're building a relationship. And in this case, where there's an error, the user's at their most vulnerable. And so that is just the best place to focus on to build that emotional connection. So James Singola is one of my colleagues at Google. When a user falls between the cracks, as in the case of an error, the perception of persona and brand is perhaps the strongest. So again, this is, you know, how are they going to understand the persona that they're speaking to? And that can be done best in these error cases. So to give you, okay, I didn't realize that the slides keep going on here. So we've got no match and no input timeouts. No match is basically where you're listening for a grammar, like something that the user's going to say, and it doesn't match something that we're listening for. So it's a no match. And then, you know, do we have a response to that? What's our strategy? What's our dialogue strategy to support that? No inputs are basically when the user doesn't say anything. And we call them these technical error names, but actually there are real life user conditions for why these happen. And for your persona, your brand, your agent, you know, in your context, in the job to be done, what might be some of the conditions? Why might they be having some of these problems? You have to think about that. You have to consider that. So there's loads. They might not understand. They might just be hesitating. They might have been distracted. There might be background noise. They might have been interrupted by something in real life. So for example, for the interrupted one, we might be creating a social game. There might be lots of people involved. So they could easily be interrupted in that case. So you have to plan for that. You have to design a strategy for that. So don't say general things like this. Don't say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I mean, that's useless. You have to have a better strategy. So it's better to anticipate and identify where errors are likely to happen, do a lot of research and find these cases, design the hell out of these cases and make them amazing, and use conversational language and be empathic for people, and give them more support. The last point is basically just to give them more support as they need it. So yeah, use human stories, use co-design, have social experiences during the design process. It really helps. Anticipate errors and use conversational language and be empathic. Cool.
Thank you, Marc. We have time for just one or two questions, so if anyone has anything to ask, there's one at the back there. If you would wait for the microphone.
Hi. Very quickly, you mentioned listening earlier on in the slides. Do you have any ways of measuring good listening?
That's a really tough question. When I spoke about listening, I meant very generally throughout the whole design process. You need to be listening all the time, because as a user-centered person, as someone who's always thinking about the user, that really shows how well you're listening. Have you listened well enough to your users? The first thing that comes to mind should always be, what's the user needs? What's the use case? Where are they? And it's not just I don't know how many people are designers here. Hands up if you're a designer, specifically. Okay. So not everyone's a designer here. It's not just the designer's job to champion the user. It's the whole organization needs to champion the user. The whole product team needs to be aware of the user needs and the context and the job to be done. The whole feature design process needs to basically start with the job to be done. So I don't know any ways to measure that, but ultimately it's going to be measured by how good the end experience is going to be.
Thank you. Any more questions?
How do you go about testing these things? Because traditional user testing, you can get loads of results on a really small scale. The types of examples you're giving probably only reveal themselves at very large scales. So how do you learn from testing?
That's a really good question. So I worked with Kostya. When I started doing this, me and Kostya teamed up, just two of us in London, and we did weekly usability studies. And we built the Wizard of Oz prototyping tool for Google. And we learned about persona, about trust, about comfort in the usability studies, which was qualitative. It was qualitative research. And so Kostya's speaking at the end of that, and so I think he'll be speaking a bit more about the methodologies for testing. But it's qualitative testing. It's not, you can look at the numbers and you can look at retention and daily active users and that, but really to understand trust and things like that, you really want to be doing more immersive research, more qualitative research.
Okay, afraid we don't have time for any more questions. I'm sorry about that. But you can get Marc's details from our website. So if you have anything, I'm sure you can tweet him or we'll get in touch with him in other ways. So please join me in thanking Marc.